Good day to you. This is Greg Krasovsky. I'm an attorney and a former police officer. And today I wanted to talk to you about a difficult topic, sexual harassment, abuse, and other sexual misconduct. This isn't something that I think any attorney or any former law enforcement officer wants to see in their work and their practice, but unfortunately it is a part of life, and this is something we have to deal with. And just to start off, if you or anyone else that you know have been or are victims of sexual harassment, abuse, other types of sex crimes or sexual misconduct, please call experienced and competent attorney who you can talk to. So we can evaluate what happened to you, give you some advice on what your options are, and if necessary, represent you. Help you get justice by working with law enforcement, with prosecutors, or help you get justice by filing appropriate complaints against the perpetrator, your place of work, or other organization where the perpetrator works, or even filing a civil suit, seeking compensation for your pain and suffering. Also punitive damages. As you know, these things happen in different contexts in different places. We get harassment in the workplace, also misconduct, that unfortunately goes even to sexual abuse. If you've encountered this or know someone else who has in their workplace, or as part of their work. For instance, if an employee is working on site at a client's location, or is working as a contractor somewhere else, or even abroad in various countries, and something that's inappropriate has been done or has happened to them, please get some legal advice right away. Because the goal is, number one, to make it stop, number two, to make those who've done it, the perpetrators, accountable, and number three, obviously ensure your safety and try to get you the compensation that you need for medical help, for psychological and psychiatrical treatment, for any post-traumatic stress disorder, or any other issues that have come up, or any other injuries that this has caused you. Aside from workplace harassment and abuse, which, by the way, is extremely difficult to deal with in certain professions. For instance, in law enforcement, in the military, in the intelligence community, or in other first responder agencies such as fire departments or EMS services, or humanitarian disaster relief organizations. If you've encountered something like this and you're concerned that voicing the complaint, making the complaint, exposing the perpetrator could potentially ostracize you or damage your career or get you fired or even compromise your safety, right? Then definitely talk to an attorney who understands those issues, and especially in those industries, because we will let you know what we can do for you and what you need to do to make this stop and to hold people accountable. So that's very important. Aside from the workplace, people encounter these issues, unfortunately, in educational facilities and institutions, starting all the way from elementary school through places of higher education, colleges, universities, including even graduate and postgraduate programs. So if you've encountered or you've suffered from harassment, abuse, other inappropriate behavior from fellow students, from employees of those institutions, or even worse, from teaching staff or administrative staff in positions of power, then please no matter how uncomfortable this is for you, don't blame yourself. Talk to an attorney. Remember, even communications that we have with potential clients enjoy attorney-client privilege. That means whatever we discuss will be held in confidence. The attorney is not going to disclose anything, and the disclosure of something like this, it's extremely difficult to obtain because of attorney-client privilege and the protection that it provides to current, past, and even potential prospective clients of attorneys and law firms. Any educational setting should not be a place where a student or even a faculty member or an employee should feel threatened because they're being harassed, because they're being abused, or having even crimes committed against them. Just like places for medical care, any healthcare facility. And unfortunately, we see that in the news, where doctors, nurses, other medical professionals have been found guilty of sexual harassment, abuse, rape, and other sex crimes. They've taken advantage of the patient-doctor or patient-medical professional relationship, and they've abused the trust of their patients, and they've committed crimes. If this has happened to you, give us a call, because this is definitely more than just medical malpractice. And it's certainly not medical malpractice. We also, unfortunately, get inquiries and have handled complaints from people who've suffered from abuse, harassment, and sex crimes in places of worship, or from members of employees of religious organizations, including clergy. I'm not just talking about, scandals with the Roman Catholic Church that's had numerous settlements for the sexual abuse that their priests have perpetrated. Unfortunately, sexual harassment, abuse, and crimes aren't limited to any particular faith, confession, or religious organization. They happen in all sorts of religious organizations and religions, and not just in one country, but all around the world, as you can imagine, and I'm sure you know. So no matter what religion or religious organization you belong to, if something like this has happened to you or to someone that you know, inappropriate sexual behavior that rises to the level of harassment or abuse, please seek the help of an attorney so we can help make this stop and hold people accountable who did this to you, and try to get you compensation that you need for your pain and suffering. And if necessary, work with local law enforcement, local prosecutors, to make sure that the individuals responsible for it are prosecuted to the fullest extent, right, permitted by law. Although we do know of cases that we've seen in the news, and I've seen in my practice, where people get sweet plea bargains. They weasel out of getting a just punishment for what they've done for various reasons, because of their social standing, because of their connections, because of the money that they have. And that's not right, because everyone should be equal before the law. Aside from educational institutions, medical institutions, religious institutions, and just generally in the workplace, as I mentioned, even particular difficult industries, such as the military, law enforcement, intelligence community, first responders. Anyone can become a victim. And it becomes especially complicated if something like this happens to you abroad. Whether you're traveling abroad as a tourist, or whether you're abroad on a business trip, or in a business or work assignment. People have fallen victims, including members of the diplomatic corps, not just of the US, but other countries, where they've faced sexual abuse and harassment from either within their own organizations, or from people they had to deal with as part of their job description. When it happens abroad, things get even more complicated because you really don't know who to trust. You're not sure whether local law enforcement, local prosecutors are going to protect your rights as a victim, are going to give you fair treatment, especially if the people involved may enjoy, high standing within that particular country and have good connections within that society. In that case, it's also extremely important to contact an attorney that has the right experience dealing with international cases and working with these cases abroad. Often, situations like this can also result or lead to claims for refugee status, for asylum, for victims who are afraid of the retribution, of the backlash that they may face in their own country. If that's the case, then we can certainly help you from an immigration law point of view, because I and my colleagues, we have experience in dealing in providing legal advice, proper representation for people who are putting in asylum applications for temporary refugee status or protected person status. So that's important as well. Anyway, the whole goal is, and I've certainly enjoy and take pride in doing this. I did as a police officer and now as an attorney, in helping protect people from misconduct like this, especially the vulnerable. When we're talking about minors, when we're talking about women, or people who feel they have no way out because the abuser enjoys a position of power, can ruin their career, can threaten their lives or their relatives or their livelihood. Those victims need as much protection, as much help as possible, and we'll more than gladly provide that to you. Because I think we really want to live in a world that's a better place, where conduct like this just doesn't have any place and is generally recognized to be wrong. Why does it happen more in certain industries? Because let's look at the Harvey Weinstein scandals, right? Well, should we be surprised? Let's look at what Hollywood has been putting out, not just Hollywood, but movie industries around the world. Movies that are packed with violence, gratuitous, excessive violence, including all sorts of gory things that you shouldn't see on the screen, because this does have a negative impact on people from a psychological point of view. Desensitizes them, and those who are on the edge can, even lead them to try to imitate art. And these movies also have a lot of gratuitous, inappropriate, reckless sexual behavior, or the sexual objectification of women, even of teenagers. So when you see something like this, when this message is projected day in, day out to viewers, not only is it going to impact and influence the viewing audience, let's think about what it does to the people in the industry who are having to work every day in that type of environment, producing this type of visual product. So should we be surprised that movie directors, producers, actors, or other people who work on the set, are just going to go crazy and either be violent or engage in inappropriate sexual misconduct? I don't think we should be surprised. So maybe what we want to do, because as movie viewers, right, as the audience, we vote with our wallets, right? We vote with our feet by going to movie theaters. Maybe we should try to stay away from movies or from TV series that are glorifying or showing needless excessive violence, including sexual violence, sexual misconduct, right? Or reckless promiscuity or abuse of alcohol. And we know what those situations can lead to, where you end up getting requests for assistance from men and women who were taken advantage of because they were drunk to the point of not being able to give legitimate informed consent, or to the point of unconsciousness. People wake up and they have no idea what happened to them the night before, with the exception of they know something happened to them sexually inappropriate. Here, I'm not going to blame the victim, because even if you're drunk, that doesn't give someone else the right to take advantage of you. But it's also good advice not to put yourself in compromising situations, right? It's just when people tell you, well, maybe in certain neighborhoods, it's not a good idea to walk at night, with valuables out in the open. We're not defending criminals and robbers who may mug you or rob you. But if you want to minimize those chances, then you also have to act responsibly and not put yourself in particular situations. So getting back to certain industries, if we see something that's starting to happen in a particular industry, there's a reason for it. And if we can do something against that, either as participants of that industry or its consumer of its product, then let's do that, right? Let's make the right choices and let's send the right message that we as a society, we as consumers, or just people in general, are not going to support certain type of conduct, right? If it means boycotting particular institutions, boycotting particular products, including, products in show business, then so be it. Because we all have an obligation to try to not just protect ourselves and our loved ones, but we also have an obligation to try to protect other people in society, especially those who are vulnerable, whether it's minors or other people who are put in positions where they cannot say no because of socioeconomic reasons, or are victimized because of socioeconomic reasons. Speaking of victimization for socioeconomic reasons, one of the saddest things I have to deal with as an attorney who handles immigration law matters are situations where people seek employment in other countries, especially the young or women, and often they're getting employed illegally, right? We're talking about illegal migrants or people who will arrive in a country legally, let's say on a tourist visa, but engage in illegal employment without the right to do so. And since you're already involved in something illegal, unfortunately, you have people, basically scumbags, who will take advantage of it. And they try to exploit, they try to sexually harass and abuse people who they think are not going to be in a position to defend themselves or seek help from law enforcement because they're already doing something wrong or illegal. This is just like a situation where someone is involved in prostitution and they're afraid to report a crime committed against them because they're already involved in illegal prostitution. If you or someone that you know has been put in that uncomfortable position, in other words, you may be working in a country illegally or in some violation of local labor, licensing, or immigration laws, or you're getting paid under the table, even in your own country. And within that context, within that setting, you've become the victim of sexual harassment or sexual abuse, and you're not sure whether you have any rights, or you don't think you're willing to risk bringing people to justice because this may have adverse legal consequences for you. Please talk to a lawyer. Things may not be as bad as you think. There are various programs that can help people who become victims of crime, even though they're doing something illegal, especially if you cooperate with law enforcement. We may be able to get you immunity. We may be able to get you protection. Or if things are really bad, depending on the situation, you may be placed in a witness protection program, either on a temporary or a permanent basis. But definitely talk to a lawyer to see what we can do to help you. Don't be afraid that leveling accusations, true accusations against the perpetrator is going to destroy your career or destroy the standing in your community. There is nothing wrong with being a victim. Any one of us can end up being a victim, just like any one of us can become the victim of a burglary or breaking into our car or having our car stolen or something else, or being the victim of a pickpocket where someone steals something from your pockets or from your purse on the streets or in public transportation. There's no shame in that. So if something like this happens to you, talk to a lawyer. We'll try to explain to you what we can do for you and minimize any negative impact that you think reporting something like this would have for you. The last part that I wanted to talk about is defending those who are the victims of false complaints of sexual harassment, sexual abuse, or other sexual misconduct. Those people potentially may be even in a worse position than victims. Because here, let's say you're an innocent, honest person who's actually done nothing wrong. And now there's a threat that your career, your profession, your reputation, your social standing could be destroyed by false accusations against you. What's worse is you could be actually convicted of a crime that you didn't commit. Because for some reason, whether for material advantage or for spite or for some other reason, the victim has the supposed victim has decided to lodge false complaints against you. I also see this in the domestic context when we're talking about divorces, custody disputes, disputes over division of marital property, where we've seen immoral, irresponsible spouses, both men and women, level false accusations against the spouse to gain advantage in divorce proceedings, either for custody or they think it's going to get them advantage in division of marital property. Think about it. It's bad enough that you're being falsely accused. It's even worse that you're being falsely accused by someone who you've loved before, by a close person that you've trusted before, and including by witnesses who may have been bribed or induced by the perpetrator to give false testimony. I'm talking about the perpetrator of the false complaint, to give supporting false testimony. So if you're facing false accusations of sexual abuse, harassment, or other sexual misconduct, you definitely need to talk to a lawyer as soon as possible. You may have a lawyer that may be competent in family law, but it may not be someone who has enough experience in criminal law, especially in the international context. Because one of the things that I've seen in my practice handling international family law matters have been false accusations of domestic abuse, domestic assault, including domestic sexual abuse, to gain advantage in divorce and custody proceedings abroad, on the home turf, against the spouse who's from another country. And then the foreign spouse who's falsely accused is at a tremendous disadvantage because it's not his or her country. They may not speak the language. They may not have any connections. And the false accuser, the perpetrator, may have all those advantages working for him or for her. They may have connections within the local judiciary through their lawyers or without their lawyers. They may have connections and be able to get preferential treatment from their local law enforcement, from the local child protective service agencies. And this can create a recipe for disaster for the spouse who's the victim of the false accusation. Because then you can lose a lot of things. You can lose the rights to your children. You can lose rights to marital assets that should be lawfully yours, including businesses that you may have created and run. And you can also lose access to your kids. And well, I've already mentioned that, but you can also be incarcerated in some foreign prison. And our consular officials or the consular officials of your country, they can't help you. They can visit, they can make inquiries. As you know, visitation for consular officials is permitted when people are incarcerated. They can check up on a case. but they can't do anything in the judicial process. For that, you need the assistance of competent and experienced lawyers, both local lawyers and foreign lawyers. Because often what I see is sometimes people will pick a local lawyer who may be afraid of doing everything that he or she could do for their client, the victim, because of various local issues, or he may be intimidated. And this is why it helps to have, as a supervising attorney or as a backup, a lawyer, from your home country, or my law office, where I've always told people, look, what I've learned around the years is I'm not afraid of anyone, and neither are my colleagues, the lawyers that I choose to work with. We don't get intimidated by people with money, by people with connections, whether these are, political, law enforcement, intelligence connections, it doesn't matter. If we believe that our clients are being victimized, then we're going to do everything that it takes to try to get them justice. And we're not going to be afraid of being blacklisted or something like that, because that's part of our work. And if necessary, we'll try to bring appropriate attention to your case in mass media, because that's one thing I always say. What vermin always hate is, they hate the light. You drag them out into the light, all of a sudden they don't want to do all the bad things that they would be willing to do in the shadows, in the dark. So, listen, thank you for taking the time to listen to this video on a difficult subject. But what I want to get across to you is, if you know someone, or this has happened to you, or you're seeing it happen, you're seeing it done by someone, please give us a call. Let's try to put this wrongful conduct to an end with our assistance and intervention. And let's also try to get the victim as much assistance and justice as possible, including compensation. Thank you.